thank you very much. Thanks for that great introduction. I really enjoyed what Cindy had to say as well, and I'm going to kind of touch on that. Again, my name is Natalie Kortum, and I am at Humana. I've recently joined. I'm opening up their Dallas office, so we are hiring. If anybody's interested in coming and joining Humana, certainly let me know. But I'm going to be talking about revolutionizing decision-making. And I wrote how Analyst will take over the business. I actually got to do this presentation in Germany really recently. And they had translated it to how the analyst will conquer the business, you know. And so it's kind of an interesting translation. But yeah, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about how the analyst will take over the business. So starting off, as we heard from Cindy, she gave some very specific examples in the mobile space of big data, but big data will definitely change the way in which analysis is done forever. And part of the reason why is because we're going to have so much more data, we can predict things like when somebody might get married, right? Just like Cindy was talking about from a Facebook perspective. But we also have a lot of data, and that increases our statistical relevance, right? Allowing us to be more certain on things that we wouldn't have been able to have before, a greater sample size, if you will. So big data will absolutely change analytics forever. Can anybody tell me, the answer came up right away. So I was going to ask the question, but big data. Anybody knows where that, everybody knows where that started, right, with web analytics. So according to Teradata, they said that's where big data originally started. So all of the folks that have been in the digital space have been in web analytics. You guys have been the starting point of this. You have been the ones that have discovered how to look at data, make it business relevant, make it in a way that the business can make decisions off of it, and ripe from, we can learn a great deal from the trailblazers in the digital space around approaching some of the other areas. Like I would say around marketing investment, optimization, or in some areas like HR is doing some interesting analytics these days, trying to understand if they've recruited the right people, right? Trying to understand what information and recommendations and what evaluations they get in from the interviews that predict if somebody's going to be a star performer or not. So there's a lot of interesting ways in which we can build off of the learnings that we've gotten from the web analytics folks. So I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to try and go through this a little quickly because I think most folks probably kind of understand this in this arena. But I'm going to walk through what happens with the business decision making. I'm going to make this kind of generic. This isn't specific to web analytics or digital space, but basically any business decision that's going on today. You know, if you think of marketing investment, you know, look at how Mad Men, anybody watch Mad Men? People watch Mad Men? Yep. So if you look at that, a lot of what was done at the point in time that Mad Men is based on was done around gut instincts. There's a lot of, you know, this is what I think will be the right way. It's certainly not what's done today, right? We use a lot more data today. But any business decision making that's happening today, it's going on. And all of a sudden, data, there's some sort of data that could be used in that business decision making. Okay, so we've got this data, we've got a business decision making. What do we do? How do we integrate that data into the conversation? Well, the very first thing we do is we start to look at just some generalized reporting, understanding trends. This is certainly how web analytics started, right? Let's look at page views. Let's try to understand visitors. And then as that becomes accepted by the business decision maker, it can start to get integrated into guiding that business decision. The next stage we go into is KPI, I mean key performance indicators. If you're not familiar with that term, just think metrics, right? So some sort of metric gets created. Some of these metrics start to be meaningful, and you can see this, right? Probably people can pull from examples. Oh my gosh, this number's down this quarter. What are we gonna do about it, right? Because that metric starts to get that business acceptance, and it starts to really mean something. Okay, so where do we evolve after we've gotten some metrics, right? We start to move into what I like to call business intelligence. You know, the modeling world kind of calls this data exploration. But this is where you start to really look at the data and you start to ask the business decision maker, you know, those people that have been in the role 20 years, you know, the Mad Men folks, why are you making this decision? Why would you choose this and not that? And you start to learn why some of these decisions have been made and build off of that expertise. And then you start to tie that in with some of the data and start to find some very interesting findings. After that, you can start to build your models. And of course, all this is iterative because you'll learn along the way, you know, maybe I need this data. Maybe I can go back and collect some more data. Maybe I can change some of the reporting trends, etc. So all of this continually evolves. And then as your modeling gets so sound, you can start moving into some of that machine learning aspect. And I certainly think this is where the digital space is going. I've certainly heard several companies have been talking about the fact that they're doing content based off of, you know, changing the order of the website, et cetera, based off of that user and trying to predict what would be the most useful case for them. I certainly would count that as a machine learning perspective. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of how the data gets evolved into the business decision making. But what I want to really highlight on, and certainly something I personally have struggled with in the last 3 years, is on this acceptance piece. At each one of these stages, you have to get that business decision maker to say, yes, I want to integrate this in. Yes, this is useful. And that's certainly where I think there's the difference between a good analyst and a great analyst, is being able to understand that and be able to impact that. I think it's where a lot of analytics groups are struggling these days. So what good is the perfect analysis? I work with a lot of people from academia that come straight out from school, PhDs, et cetera. And they often want to build the best model possible from a very statistical perspective. The best model possible isn't always what the business wants. And so, you know, what good is having that perfect analysis the first time if it never gets implemented? I think a great example of this is looking at a law, trying to get a law passed, right? We see this in our political system all the time. It may not be the perfect law that we can get passed, but at least we've got something on the books. And maybe then we can improve it. In the same way, I think you have to approach analysis. Let me work with the people that own this decision today, find out what they find is important. Maybe it's not the perfect thing, but let's get started and let's start impacting the business. Okay, my automation seems to be off, so you guys get the answers way ahead of time. But so I started to look at successful ongoing analytics projects that I had. And I compared those to some of the ones that I thought would be successful. And I looked across my entire career. I chatted with some of my colleagues about it as well. And I started to think about what are the requirements to have a successful ongoing analytics. And what I mean by that is a project that continually gets funding quarter after quarter to either improve it or expand it, but it's continually implemented on. And so as I started to look at that, the very first thing I realized that the successful ongoing analytics needed was to meet a strategic business need. And I know everybody says this, but let me tell you what I mean by meet a strategic business need. I mean something that the business itself finds important, not the analytics group finds important. So you go and you talk to your executive or your business decision maker and you kind of pitch a little side idea. Oh, you know, we got this data in. Maybe we could do something here. And they say, yeah, that's cool. Not only do they like it in that meeting, but they ask about it in the next one. That's the meets a strategic business need. Okay, so now I'm supposed to have automation go to the second one. See if you guys could guess it, but I guess you already know the answer. Explain the analytics in a way the business can understand. So this, I think, is again where a lot of analytics groups these days are getting caught up. Is, you know, I've done some social media models that measured the impact, the return of social media, and it was advanced modeling. And how do I walk into those social media execs and the marketing execs who may not have a background, maybe took one stats class, right, in their MBA course. How do I explain to them how this modeling works? Well, that's really hard. How do I get them to go, not only explain it to them, but get them to take a chance on it and say, yeah, let's go ahead and fund more social media. You know, that's a very challenging conversation to have. So you have to find a way to make it accessible. And I'm going to give some tips as well about that. And then the final one, of course, I think is the one that most analytics groups are really focused on, which is that demonstrate ROI. So you have to make sure that what you've modeled and the data that you're using is actually having stronger results than their tribal knowledge or their gut instincts and warrants the investment dollars. And you have to prove it, right? You have to actually prove that you provided that information, which can be a bit of a challenge as well. Okay, so here's some tips. So this is focused on that number 2. So back over here where we said, explain the analytics in a business way, in a way that the business can understand. So I'm just going to go through some of the tips that I use with my analytics group. So the very first one is when you're about ready to make a presentation or a recommendation on a specific analysis to a business decision maker, is take it from their side, right? Think about it from your audience's perspective. What is it that they're being asked to do? What is it that they want to tell their manager or the board, if you're talking to, the president of the company? Think about it from their side and what are the struggles that they're having, and focus your analysis on assisting them. If you don't know, go ask them. Hey, what are the top of mind problems that you have today, right? And once you do that, I think it will not only frame the work effort that you do, but also your presentation. Okay, the other thing that I found that made, that was really successful for me was to walk my presentation past somebody who was not technical. I loved the people. I used to sit at Dell with the same people that wrote the social media blogs. They were fantastic people because they did not have a background in stats and were not afraid to say, whatever you just said, I didn't understand. So find somebody in the company that's like that, whoever it may be, that is not part of your group, that is willing to sit down and let you talk at them and walk them through the presentation. And in doing that, when I really became successful at this, and I think you guys will laugh at this, but I pretended that my audience was my mother or my 10-year-old niece, and how I would explain what I did. And after I started to do that in my presentations, I got some fantastic feedback from the executives. So thinking about it from that perspective. Also, you can use the, you need to take only 2 minutes to explain your methodology. So I find that a lot of academia, PhD stats, they wanted to spend a lot more time. So find a way to explain your methodology in under 2 minutes. Be very quick about it. And of course, going back to that whole idea of, how would you explain this to your mother, assuming she's not a PhD in stats, use analogies. And I think that's very successful. Okay, the other thing you have to do is convince somebody to actually take a chance on your analysis. Is you have to create some proof points, right? If you can, point to another executive at the company that's using your work effort. So, for example, hey, the exec over in HR is already using this similar approach and allows them to network. If you don't have that option, if it's a new approach that isn't even being used within your company, are there other markets? Hey, this is how the financial community normally approves loans. We're using a very similar modeling approach to that. And then lastly, if you don't even have that, find out who your business decision maker, your executive's respected technical person is. Get in a room with them. Make them part of the process of the analysis. And then when you go to that meeting with the exec to have your project implemented, have them there nodding their head. It makes it much more successful. And lastly, this is one of the things that I find a lot of the folks from academia do a lot, is they want to put all the assumptions on there, which certainly is what you're trained to do in school. But when you do that with an executive, what they hear is you're not confident in the analysis. And they actually expect you to come up with a lot of assumptions, manage those assumptions, and they view that as part of your role. So minimize the number of assumptions you're going to display to them. Certainly pull out anything that's large for sure, but don't have the entire slide full of assumptions, which I've seen before. So those are some of my tips for communicating analysis. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how the data and how the deliverable structure will go. But let's talk a little bit about this acceptance piece. And I want to talk, I think this will really frame for you where I'm going in terms of how the analyst will take over the business decision making. Okay, so we're going to go down history lane for a minute. I used to be a pricing manager. I did it for several years. So it's very interesting. Pricing actually started in the airline industry. So there was an individual who started to look at all this data that they were collecting. They started to see, hey, we know when people are booking, we know here are the routes. We started to know here's the fill rate of the plane. Maybe we could do something different and price things on the fly a little bit better. And so I imagine this pricing person went over to or this data person went over to the person that was actually doing the pricing and said, hey, I got an idea. Okay, let's test it out. Let's try it on one little region. And I think this happens, by the way, with a lot of different new ideas around how to integrate data into business decision making. So it's not just pricing. I've seen this throughout other areas as well. But hey, sure, let's test it. Okay, we'll try it on one region. We'll try it really small here. Oh, wow. Looks like it worked, right? Revenue's up, costs down. Well, let's implement it. But you know what? I still own this decision. I'm still the pricing person. So you guys go ahead and do your modeling and pass it over to me, but I'm going to approve every price point. Okay, well, that seems to be so successful. All of a sudden, that pricing person, that non-technical business decision makers no longer required in that approval process, and it's actually becoming a drain on their job. So they say, implement, but you approve. You seem to really have learned this pricing process, and I trust you. I think I can delegate this work effort to you because it's becoming too much of a drain for me. And finally, it becomes, wow, this has been so successful, let's automate and you monitor. And so that's where, that's that evolution. And as you can see, the flow of the business decision making is passing over into the analytics group. And here's an example. I think it's the exception that proves the rule. This is a couple years old now, but there were several companies out on Amazon that were pricing for a book, and they had an algorithm based on supply. They didn't actually have the supply, but they knew they could get it. And they also had an algorithm based off of their competitive price points that were in the market. And these competing algorithms just kept pushing the price up and up and up and up until it hit $2 million. So a used book for $2 million. And of course that got blogged about and the algorithms got tweaked. But it shows you that nobody is particularly watching these price points. They're actually flowing through on the fly. And I think you'll see more of this in more of the business decision making that we have. Hopefully not more books for $2 million, but more of this. Okay, so we see that we've seen this evolution of the business decision maker and how that business decision maker is passing that, that control of that decision and that expertise of that decision over to the analytics group. And eventually, and this is certainly where it is in pricing, you are the expert in this area, in this decision. You own it. You know it better than I do anymore. Let me just give you the context of what I'm trying to accomplish. And I certainly think that this is true in the digital space too. We're certainly seeing this in the digital space. But I think where this becomes more interesting is in some areas like the sensors, what we were talking about, product design. I could see this coming up in product design. There's more and more decisions that are being based off of analytics as the design of the project comes about. There's all sorts of areas in which analytics is starting to be incorporated, and I think in the next 10 years or so, we will start to see that flow into more decision making. So if you are, like I am, more of a general analytics person that's kind of floated around between digital, marketing, investment, pricing, those are certainly the areas that I've kind of focused on, you might need to pick a place because you're going to start to own some of these business decisions and you're going to start to become more specialized in your areas. And I think it's a great future. I think we'll also see some of the people who own these decisions become far more analytical as well. And it will be a requirement to be at that level of capability with analysis. So that's my revolutionizing the decision making, how the analyst will take over the business. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I would ask if anyone is interested in hearing more about Humana and the opportunities we have. Love to talk to you. Thank you guys very much. Thanks.
Stand there. Sorry. I just had a couple follow-up questions for you. Yeah, come on. So it was, especially right at the end there, I thought it was really interesting talking about how it's going to factor into the product development cycle and how sentiment analysis can really be pulled in. Because what can you learn from your social media group, and how do you work together between the products and the social media group? Yeah,
absolutely. And that is something that was done at Dell historically, and I hope to do it at Humana. I'm not sure if it's being done today. But absolutely, that you can start to read the social media feedback, and even to the point where you can know when there's going to be a product failure issue ahead of actually having a product failure. What company was it that did this? There was a dog food company that had this as well, that they started to realize that there was some sort of problem with their treats. But you can absolutely use that social media data, understand things like, hey, this one feature, I like the product, but this one feature really annoys me, and that gets out on social media. As you start to aggregate that and learn about that, you can design the next iteration of the project or the product to account for it.
Right, and that will be particularly important for companies like Fitbit, like Cindy mentioned, the product feedback. Well, this doesn't quite fit right, or it's not working for me in terms of the app. So people will be able to build that into the cycle. Kind of going back to the beginning in terms of explaining the metrics you think are important and what you need to track. How did you accomplish that shift in speaking to your executives? I want you to build up on that a little bit more in terms of how you summarized it for them and the talk to your mom.
Yeah, that's really difficult. I studied Bill Gates, honestly. So I started to look at some of his speaking styles and found a blog online that was talking about it and talking about how different people, different large presenters are graded in terms of how well they speak externally, and talked a little bit about the level of education that somebody needs to be able to follow them. And in doing so, then I started to think, well, geez, that's true. How would I explain this to my niece, who at the time was 10 years old? And so as I started to evaluate that, and I just did it as a trial, to be honest with you, in one of the presentations, I had gotten some pretty severe marks in presenting to my CMO. And so I decided the next time, well, I'm going to try this approach. It can't be any worse than what went last time. And then out of that, I was told, oh my gosh, night and day difference. And from there, built upon it, right? We all learn from our failures, so.
Excellent point. And I think that's a good lesson and a takeaway for everybody. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's thank Natalie again, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.